Trevor, 27, flight instructor at a small regional field. Whole job is teaching nervous people how to not lose it when something goes wrong in the air. Engine coughs, a gauge drops, the student starts sweating through his shirt. And my one rule is simple. You don't panic, you run the checklist, you land the plane. Staying calm under pressure is pretty much the only thing anyone knows me for. Never once figured I'd need a checklist for my own living room. This is the story of how I found out my girlfriend had an emergency procedure of her own, and it had nothing to do with a fire extinguisher. Her name was Paige, 25, worked as a realtor. Genuinely good at it too, could show you a basement with a damp problem and have you calling it a wine cellar by the end of the tour. We'd been together a little over 2 years by the time all of this finally came to a head. Met through a friend of a friend at a cookout, hit it off fast, moved in together after about a year. The early stretch was good. I want to be fair about that. She was funny, driven, actually remembered the small stuff, showed up when it counted. That first year, honestly, I'd have told you flat out she was the one. She'd pack me a lunch when I had early flights and leave notes in it, dumb little drawings of planes. Came out to the field once to watch me run a demo flight and told everyone there I was the best pilot on the property, like she genuinely believed it. That's the version of her I spent 2 years trying to steer back to. The one that existed before that balcony turned into her second home. Then the pattern showed up, and once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. Every couple fights, that's normal. I'm not naive about how relationships work. Ours just always took the exact same route, every single time. We'd argue about something small, dishes left in the sink, whose weekend it was to drive out to her sister's, a restaurant she wanted that I didn't. Paige would go quiet, pick up her phone, and walk out onto the balcony. The slider would shut behind her, and through the glass I'd catch her laughing. Took me a couple of weeks to place whose name kept floating back in through the gap in the door. Brant, the ex. The first time it really registered was pretty early on, maybe 3 or 4 months into living together. We'd had some dumb fight about money, splitting a bill for something, and she vanished onto the balcony for a solid 45 minutes. Came back in totally cheerful, like the argument had been surgically lifted out of her memory. I asked who she'd been talking to, and she said, breezy as anything. Oh, just Brant. He always knows how to calm me down. Let it slide. Told myself it was harmless, that being friendly with an ex was mature, that I'd be the weird one for making it a thing. Looking back, that was the exact moment to say something, and I said nothing. Funny enough, early on I'd had a friend of my own she couldn't stand. Girl I'd known since school, strictly a friend, we'd grab a coffee maybe once a season and catch up. Paige was not subtle about how much she disliked it. Said it made her uncomfortable, said a guy in a relationship had no business getting coffee with another woman, asked me to cool it off. So I dropped it. Coffee stopped, the friendship quietly went cold, and she felt secure again. Handled her discomfort in a single afternoon, no reading list required. Remember that part? It comes back around. A few weeks after that came a bigger one. I'd dropped the ball on something she asked me to handle, picking up an item for her sister's party. Genuinely my fault, no argument there. Instead of just telling me I'd let her down, she was gone for over an hour. Came back and mentioned, real casual, that Brant thinks you don't respect my time. So now the ex has formed opinions on my character, built entirely from one side of a story, and they're getting handed back to me like a verdict from a judge I never got to stand in front of. I apologized for the thing I'd actually forgotten and said nothing about the rest. That became the whole routine, me apologizing for my part while a stranger on a balcony graded me on his. Brant was the guy she'd dated before me, did music on the side, played clubs on weekends, called himself a DJ, though, from everything I ever heard, it was mostly other people's songs at slightly wrong speeds. They'd split up well before she and I ever met, and she always filed him neatly under just a friend now, which, on its own, is fine. People stay friendly with their exes. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that's a criminal act. The timing was the part that kept snagging on me. She never once called Brant when she was happy. That phone only came out when the two of us were fighting. He was the pressure valve, and I was the pressure. I met the guy in person maybe twice the entire time. Once at a birthday thing for one of her friends. Watched her light up the second he walked in. This whole different frequency than she ever ran with me. He shook my hand a beat too long, called me the boyfriend instead of my actual name, and spent the rest of the night with her, orbiting him like he had his own gravity. Drove us home, telling myself I was imagining the whole thing. She spent that drive telling me how nice it was that Brant and I finally got to connect. We had not connected. He'd looked at me like I was a placeholder, and some quiet part of me already suspected he had good reason to. The first time I actually said something direct about it, I kept it real light. Asked her, half joking, why the ex always gets the full play-by-play of our arguments. She looked at me like I'd asked her to stop breathing. Told me Brant had been her closest friend since before she even knew I existed. Said that if I had a problem with a friendship, that was my insecurity talking, not anything she was actually doing. And there it was, the word that would trail me around for the next year. Insecure. Paige had a whole vocabulary loaded up for this. Anytime Brant's name came up, the same lines rolled out on a loop. I was being controlling. Wanting her to not vent to another man was, and I quote, textbook insecure male behavior. Somewhere in there she started forwarding me articles about it. Pieces on male fragility, on how men try to cut their partners off from their friends, on controlling behavior wearing the mask of concern. She'd read them out loud to me sometimes, slow and deliberate, like a teacher making sure it stuck. The moral was always the same shape. My discomfort was a me problem, a symptom of something broken in men as a whole category. If I really respected her, she said, I'd sit down and honestly examine why one male friend rattled me this badly. She had a couple of friends who were all in on the same script. They'd have their little wine nights and I'd come home to find I'd been the case study again. The girls think you're being possessive. A whole jury I never got to address, deliberating on me over a bottle of something. One of them told her, and she repeated it to me like a prize, that a man who's actually secure wouldn't care who his girl talks to. Funny how that rule was about to get a real-world test. At one point, she bought a whole book about toxic partners and left it on my nightstand. Not on hers, mine. Little sticky notes flagging the pages she really wanted me to sit with. Every one of them about controlling men and emotional immaturity. I read a chunk of it, trying to be a decent sport about the whole thing. Every single example of the bad partner was a man. Every wrong party in it was a woman, and somehow I was meant to see my own reflection on every page. Meanwhile, the actual thing straining us was her broadcasting my private life to an ex most nights of the week. That chapter wasn't in the book. She pulled it out in public once too. We were at dinner with a few of her friends, and I made some mild comment, don't even remember about what anymore. She turned to the whole table and said, laughing, Trevor gets so insecure, honestly fixing his masculinity is kind of a project of mine. Everyone chuckled. I chuckled too, because what else are you supposed to do? Sat there with a fork in my hand as the group's little rehab case and smiled through the whole thing. And I started actually wondering if she had a point. That's the part I'm genuinely not proud of. For a long stretch, I carried those articles home in my head and used them on myself. Maybe I was the toxic one. Maybe this was my baggage leaking all over her. Maybe a truly secure man wouldn't feel a thing. I even overcorrected. One weekend, I told her to invite Brant to a little cookout we were throwing, to prove to her and to myself that I was fine, that I was the bigger man. He showed up, ate my food, and by the end of the night, the two of them were out on the porch swapping inside jokes while I went around refilling everybody's drinks. Felt like I'd invited a guy over to audition for my own life. The real kicker came a few days after that cookout. She mentioned, all casual, that Brant had told her afterward I'd seemed threatened the whole night. So even my attempt to prove I wasn't threatened got run past him and came back stamped as fresh evidence that I was. There was no version of me that passed his red. If I stayed calm, that got logged as insecurity keeping quiet. Relaxed and friendly meant I was overcompensating, and any night I went quiet, well, that one was just sulking. The man had veto power over how my own behavior got interpreted, and I'd handed it to him myself by trying to play nice. Here's the thing, they drill into you when you teach people to fly. The plane does not care about your feelings. You can be dead certain you're straight and level, while the instruments calmly tell you you're in a slow turn toward the ground. The whole discipline is learning to trust the gauges over the story running in your head. I was real good at that in the air, and completely useless at it at home. Every gauge in that apartment was pinned in the red, and I kept flying by the story she handed me. Here's the piece that eventually cut clean through all of it, though. Brant knew things, private things. Stuff I'd told Paige and nobody else on the planet. My dad passed when I was 22, and I don't hand that story out to people. Told her once, late one night, the whole thing front to back, because I trusted her with it. A few months later, Brant texts her, "How's Trevor holding up with the anniversary coming up?" And she shows me the message like it's the sweetest thing she's ever seen. So now I know. Every fight, every soft spot, every private detail of my life is getting narrated out on that balcony to a guy I've stood in a room with maybe twice. What she kept calling venting was a broadcast. And I was the show. Somewhere in the second year, she got careful with the phone, started flipping it face down on the table, carrying it into the other room to laugh. Asked her once, real light, why the sudden secrecy. Got the full lecture about privacy and trust and how keeping tabs on her was, you already know the word, controlling. I never once went through her phone, for the record. Didn't need to. The balcony told me everything the phone would have. The comparisons kicked into gear somewhere in the back half of that year. Brant this, Brant that. Brant would understand. Brant actually listens. Brant never makes her feel crazy for having feelings. Meanwhile, I'm the guy who'd just spent an hour out in the cold bleeding his knuckles on her brake job so the car would pass inspection. But the gold standard of a supportive partner, apparently, was a man who plays other people's music too loud in other people's basements. One night in particular still sits with me. I'd handed over an entire Saturday to help her stage a house before an open showing, hauled the rented furniture up 2 flights, planted her little sign out by the road, steamed a whole set of curtains, the full circus. Came home wrecked, cooked us both dinner, and she barely lifted her eyes off the table. Brant had sent her some meme. She laughed at that phone for the better part of an hour. I could have set the tablecloth on fire, and she'd have asked me to keep it down. She was busy. The night that really showed me where I ranked was one where I had the flu. Rough couple of days, fever, aching, could barely get myself up off the mattress. We got into it over something dumb. I probably snapped because I felt like roadkill. A normal person lets an argument slide when the other one is sick in bed. She took it straight out to the balcony, lay there listening to her laugh with Brant through the wall while I couldn't keep a glass of water down. Came back in and informed me that Brant thought I was using being sick to dodge accountability. A man I'd met twice running a diagnosis on me from a balcony while I was burning up with a fever. That was the first night I thought about it clearly and put it into plain words in my head. This wasn't a friendship. It was a second opinion hotline, and I was the patient nobody had asked. It wasn't only at home either. We took a trip once, just the two of us, the kind of thing that's supposed to reset a relationship. Had a small disagreement over dinner plans the first night, genuinely nothing. I came out of the bathroom to find her out on the hotel balcony, phone pressed to her ear, laughing. Drove the better part of a day to a whole different city, and the man still pulled a front row seat to us. That's when it clicked that there was no room on earth I could take her to where it'd just be the two of us. Brant came standard, like a factory option I never once asked to have installed. There was a stretch, maybe a month before the whole thing broke, where I nearly did something about it. We'd fought, she'd done the balcony routine, and I stood in the kitchen with my thumb hovering over Nadia's name in my phone, just to see, just to feel less like the only person in the building following the rules. Then I put the phone back in my pocket and did the dishes instead. Told myself I was being the mature one. Really, I was just scared of what she'd say. So I swallowed it one more time. I finally tried to have one honest, direct conversation about all of it not long after that. Sat her down, kept my voice level, told her plainly that the endless comparing was grinding me down to nothing. I didn't even ask her to drop Brant. Just asked, could she maybe not sprint straight to him the second she and I disagreed about anything at all? That landed about how you'd expect. Overnight, I was the villain of the entire story. I was trying to control who she was allowed to talk to. I was showing my true colors. She asked me, completely straight-faced, whether I wanted to isolate her the way abusive men isolate their partners. Me, the guy who reminds her to call her own mother back. Somehow, one bad step away from an abuser. Because I didn't love that her ex had a live feed of our worst moments. The lowest point of that entire stretch landed, of all days, on my own birthday. Had a handful of friends over, nothing fancy, some food and drinks at the apartment. Paige spent a huge chunk of the night wedged into the corner, texting. Didn't need 3 guesses who was on the other end of it. One of my buddies caught it before I even did. Guy I've known since we were kids, does diagnostics down at a garage, the type who barely talks but clocks everything moving in a room. As people were filtering out, he leaned over and just said it flat. She's been on that phone with the same person for 2 solid hours. On your birthday, you understand that, right? I understood it. I just didn't have a move yet. The thing about that buddy is he's been doing cars since we were both teenagers. Guy can listen to an engine idle for 10 seconds and tell you which gasket is about to let go. He doesn't get worked up over anything. He just reads the symptom and traces it back to the cause. A couple weeks past the birthday, the two of us grab a beer. I finally lay the entire thing out for him, start to finish. The balcony, the articles, the insecure, the anniversary text, the porch swing at my own cookout, every bit of it. He lets me talk the whole way through without cutting in once, which for him is basically a bear hug. Then he tells me about a guy who'd come into the shop that week. Customers swearing up and down the car, just started making the noise on its own. I swear I didn't do anything to it. My buddy pops the hood, finds the guy had poured the wrong fluid in the wrong tank and then driven 300 miles on it. They always tell you it just broke, he says. Nobody ever walks in and tells you what they actually did. Then he looks at me and says, the same thing works on people, not just engines. They'll swear the setup is completely normal, totally healthy, nothing to look at here, right up until you run that same exact setup back at them. You've got an ex too, don't you, Nadia? So next time she does her little balcony routine, you do yours. Same rules, same everything, no cheating, no drama. Then just sit back and watch the gauges. He wasn't telling me to torch the relationship out of spite. He was telling me to run a test and actually read the results for once in my life. Nadia was my ex from the stretch before Paige. Architect, sharp as a tack, plans a run to the grocery store like she's drawing up a skyscraper. We'd ended things clean a few years back. No wreckage, just bad timing, and 2 people honest enough to say so. Maybe a text twice a year since then. Birthdays, the odd, saw this and thought of you. Flat as a table, nothing underneath it, and both of us have always known that. Paige actually knew who she was, had met her once at some event, and then called her your architect ex for months afterward like it was an official title. So, the next time Paige and I got into it, I finally had somewhere to put all of this. The fight itself was nothing. Some weekend trip we couldn't line our schedules up for. Right on cue, out comes her phone, and off she marches toward the balcony. I'll admit I sat there with Nadia's name pulled up for a good minute before I actually hit call. Not out of guilt, there was nothing on earth to feel guilty about. More that I knew the second I did it, the whole arrangement was going to come apart, and some tired part of me still wanted to save it. Then I heard Paige laughing through the glass again, same as she had 1,000 times before. And I hit call. Totally ordinary conversation. Asked how a project of hers was coming along, some building she'd mentioned going up downtown. We got to laughing about an old road trip where her car died twice in a single afternoon, and we ended up pushing it into a gas station. Maybe 5 minutes in, the slider opens behind me. Paige walks back into the room mid-laugh and stops dead in the doorway. She hears a woman's voice coming out of my phone, hears me actually laughing, the real kind, the kind I hadn't done in that apartment in a good long while. Her whole face resets. Who is that? Calm as anything, I tell her. It's just Nadia, we're catching up. Your EX, Nadia? That's the one. And then, hand to God, she asks how I could possibly be laughing with another woman while she and I are in the middle of a fight. Set the phone down on the counter and gave her the lines. Her lines, word for word. She's just a friend, Paige. You're being a little insecure right now. It's completely normal to vent to a friend when we argue. You're the one who taught me that, remember? 2 years of her own script, read right back to her, no edits, no notes. She had nothing. Opened her mouth twice, and both times it just closed again. Then came the reliable classic. That's different. Asked her how, genuinely curious which direction she'd run with it. She said Brant was a real friend, someone she'd known for years, and that Nadia was obviously an ex I still clearly had feelings for. Reminded her that Brant was also, last I checked, an ex she'd known for years. Reminded her I hadn't so much as called Nadia one single time in our entire relationship, while she'd been dialing Brant somewhere around monthly. Every new angle she reached for, her own words were already sitting there waiting for it. All I did was hand her sentences back to her and let her argue with them. She went to, I only ever did it because you never open up to me. Told her I opened up plenty, she just carried all of it straight out to Brant, which is exactly why I quit doing it. She went to, "So now you're spying on my texts." Told her the message lit up on its own, on a counter she'd left it face up on, and that if a single phone call could end a relationship, the fragile thing was never the phone call. She went to, "You did this on purpose to hurt me." Told her yes, I did it on purpose, to show her the exact thing she'd been doing to me for 2 years, and asked how it felt from this side of the glass. She tried, "You're twisting all of this. You know how much I love you." Told her love wasn't the thing on trial here, the balcony was, and she'd never once let me get a look at it. Then she reached for the coffee friend, the one she'd made me let go of years back. "You gave up your friend for me, so why can't you just trust me with mine?" Reminded her I'd dropped that friend the same afternoon she asked. No reading list, no lectures, no diagnosis of her mental state. And that the only thing I'd ever asked in return was for her to not sprint to hers in the middle of a fight, and I got branded an abuser for the request. Bringing up the coffee thing didn't help her the way she thought it would. It just proved the rule had always run in exactly one direction. Then she went quiet and did the wounded thing, waiting for me to rush in and comfort her the way I always had. Let the quiet just sit there in the room. First time in 2 years, I didn't jump to fill it. That silence did more work than anything I could have said out loud. She kept cutting her eyes over at me, waiting for the old Trevor to crack, to apologize for making it weird, to hand over the comfort she was so used to collecting. Watched her slowly clock that the guy who always folded first had already walked off the field. She used to call my calm a wall I hid behind. That night she found out it was just me, deciding I was finished arguing with someone whose mind had been made up for 2 years. The panic set in fast after that. She flipped from prosecutor to defense attorney in about a minute flat. Started insisting we were fine, that this was all silly, that I didn't need to prove some kind of point. Then she snatched her phone back up and started typing again. Asked her who she was messaging. Brant, obviously. Except the reason had completely inverted. Now she was texting him to get him to confirm, in writing, that the two of them were just friends, like she suddenly needed the paperwork on file. And while she's firing off that message, her phone is lying face up on the counter for once in its life. Didn't have to snoop, didn't so much as lean in. His reply lit up the screen right there between the two of us. The message wasn't friendly. It read like something a guy types when he's been sitting on it for a very long time. Along the lines of, "So are you finally done with him or not? I've been pretty patient here." Paige lunged for the phone, but I'd already read the whole thing. And before she got it flipped back over, I caught 2 more lines further up the thread. Her telling him a fight had been the worst one yet, from a night I remembered as the two of us basically making up over a pizza. Him answering, "You know exactly where I am when you're ready." So the fights she'd been reporting to him weren't even the fights we actually had. They were worse, dramatized, custom-built to keep him circling and keep me looking like a monster. It was worse than a broadcast. She'd been editing the footage, cutting our arguments into something uglier, so the guy on the balcony would keep his engine warm. The whole thing rearranged in about 4 seconds. All those balcony calls, all that venting, all the, "he just gets me." Brant had never been talking her down after our fights. He'd been keeping the fire fed. Every time she ran to him upset, he stoked it, told her she deserved so much better, kept himself parked on the runway for the day it all finally came apart. The "just a friend" had been running a slow play for 2 straight years. And every private thing about me she'd carried out to that balcony, my dad included. He'd been quietly banking, using it to play the one man on earth who truly understood her. She saw me reading it, and the tears started, fast. Begged me to let her explain, said it wasn't what it looked like. Asked her to scroll up. She wouldn't, so I already had my answer. Here's where the instructor in me finally took the controls. You find out mid-flight that a system's been quietly failing the entire time, you don't scream about it. You call it out plain, and you deal with what's actually in front of you. Sat down at the kitchen table and laid it all out for her, flat. One item at a time. The timing of every single call. The private things Brant somehow always knew, before I'd ever told him a word. The message still glowing on the counter between us. The edited fights, the worst one yet, that had really been a pizza and an apology. Said all of it in the exact same voice I'd used to tell a student, "We've just lost oil pressure, and here's what we do about it." And for once, Paige actually sat there and listened, the way she'd spent 2 years insisting I should listen to Brant. She cried harder, I'll be honest, a year earlier, that would have folded me clean in half. This time, I just watched it happen and stayed in my chair. She tried a few last things through the tears, said Brant's message didn't mean what it plainly meant, said she'd never once encouraged him, that he'd just read into things, said the venting had always been innocent, and I was twisting it into something ugly because that's what insecure men do. That last one almost got a real laugh out of me. Even cornered, even caught cold, the reflex was still to reach for the toxic man script. The script had just run clean out of pages. She tried to get out in front of it in the days after. I'll give her that much. Started feeding our mutual friends her version before I could get a single word in. Told them I'd emotionally checked out of the relationship months ago. Told them I'd been secretly talking to my ex behind her back the whole time. Oldest move in the book, get your story out first. Paint the other guy as the cheater. Let it dry like concrete before anyone hears the other side. Only problem was, my buddy from the garage had been standing in the room for 2 years of the real thing. He'd watched the balcony routine at every single get-together, watched her fuse to Brant's phone at my own birthday party. There was a group chat with the mutual friends, the kind that had been running for years. Paige posted her version in there first. The checked-out boyfriend, the secret ex, the works. My buddy just posted back calm, 3 or 4 lines of what he'd actually watched happen over 2 years. The chat went dead silent for a full day. Brant, who was somehow in that group too, left it that same night. Didn't defend her, didn't defend himself, just gone, like a guy stepping out of a photo before it's developed. The man had been family to that whole group for years and vanished the instant there was a chance he'd have to answer for anything. And Nadia, when a couple of Paige's friends slid into her messages fishing for dirt, handed them the truth in about 1 sentence. The call was about a building, their old friends who talk maybe twice a year, and they're welcome to go check the phone records if they're that curious about it. Turns out it's real hard to sell a cheating story when the supposed other woman is mostly just bored by the accusation. A few of the mutual friends had spent 2 years nodding along to, "Oh, Brant's harmless, they're just close." Now they were looking at the whole thing laid flat on the table, and it didn't match the story they'd been sold for years. One of her own friends, a girl I'd honestly never traded 50 words with, texted me out of nowhere to say she'd always thought the Brant thing was weird and was sorry she never spoke up. The sympathy quietly got up and moved across the room. Even her sister, the one we'd driven out to visit every other weekend, went quiet on the whole business and never once took her side out loud. Then came the part that told me everything I'd ever needed to know. The second it was clear Paige and I were actually finished, Brant evaporated. No more daily check-ins. No more, "How's Trevor holding up?" The moment there was nothing left on the table to win, the devoted best friend of 5+ years just stopped answering her texts entirely. She'd spent 2 years being told he was the one who really, truly cared about her. He cared for exactly as long as I was standing there to be replaced, and not 1 day longer. The friendship was a waiting room, and the day the appointment got canceled, he stood up and walked out and left her sitting there alone in it. Paige moved out the following weekend. No screaming match, no dishes off the wall. She just packed her things into her car and drove to her sister's place. At the door, she handed me the one line I almost wish I'd had framed. "You've changed. You used to be so secure." Sat with that for a second, then gave her the honest answer. I hadn't changed a single thing. All I'd done was run the same procedure on the flight that she'd been running the entire time, and she couldn't stand being the passenger for one afternoon. She said I was being cold. Maybe I was. I'd spent 2 years being the warm one, and it bought me a live broadcast to a guy in a basement, so I made my peace with running cold for one afternoon. About 3 weeks after she left, my phone buzzed late one night. Paige. A long message about how she'd been doing a lot of thinking, how Brant never really mattered to her, how she saw now that she'd taken me for granted. Could we please just talk? Read it once, sitting on the same couch I'd spent 2 years feeling like a stranger on. Then I set the phone face down on the cushion and went to bed. Left it on, read. Ran the checklist. And the checklist says, you don't relight an engine that already quit on you at altitude. Heard through the grapevine a good while later where Brant had ended up. Already latched onto somebody else's relationship. Same exact routine, different girl. The sympathetic friend parked in the wings, waiting for the cracks. Brant was never really in love with Paige, or with anyone. He liked being the exit door somebody else kept unlocked for him. Paige eventually figured out she'd only ever been one stop on a route. And I figured out I'd spent 2 years bracing against a man who'd have moved on the instant a better waiting room opened up down the hall. It's been a while now. Still fly, still teach, still tell every first-timer the same thing about staying calm and trusting the instruments. Had a student solo for the first time last month. Kid was terrified, hands shaking on the yoke, and I watched him run the checklist anyway and grease the landing all on his own. Told him afterward that the whole job, in the air and out of it, comes down to trusting what the gauges tell you over what your nerves are begging you to believe. He probably thought I was only talking about the plane. These days, on the rare occasion a disagreement kicks off with someone in my life, I watch one thing, whether it stays between the two of us or gets outsourced to a crowd on a balcony somewhere. That single detail tells you more about a person than a whole year of good behavior does. Learn that one the expensive way. People ask me sometimes if I got some big satisfying blowout out of the whole thing. The honest answer is, the win was a quiet one. There was no movie moment, no crowd, no music swelling up behind me. Just a woman standing in a doorway finally understanding the rules only ever ran in one direction. Me and Nadia, before anyone asks, still talk maybe twice a year. The one just friends in this entire story that turned out to be actually, genuinely just friends. Kind of funny how that shook out. I've got a new rule now, and it works exactly the same in the cockpit as it does at home. When a warning light comes on, you don't argue with the light. You don't let anybody talk you into believing the light is your insecurity. You find out why it's on. Paige spent 2 years insisting that light was a me problem. The light was right the entire time. One last thing before I go. If she can call her ex after every fight and the whole world agrees that's just healthy communication, then you're allowed to pick up your phone too. And if the entire thing only comes apart the second you do the exact same thing she's been doing for years, then it was never really about communication. It was about who was allowed to hold the phone. Anyway, fly safe, lads.